Now, there are not many men, certainly not many men in the United States or Britain, who know more about Venezuela than Professor Dan Kovalik. He's written books on the subject, has been a frequent visitor, and is a stern critic of US policy towards the Latin American state. Professor, lawyer, and author Dan Kovalik, thank you again for joining us. Dan, good to see you. I didn't
too,
think
George,
Trump was
very
going
much.
to do this. I didn't think Trump was going to do this, but I now think I was wrong. What's your feeling?
Yes, well, I also shared your skepticism that he would engage in a full-scale invasion of Venezuela because, as you mentioned, I think it will result in a Latin American Vietnam for the United States when you have millions of Venezuelans who have joined the militia in that country to defend the homeland. So I don't see how the U.S. has nearly the human power to take that on. But as you say, it looks like Trump has painted himself into a corner. You know, when you make these kind of threats and you send a military flotilla to threaten a country, at some point you may feel like to save face you have to use it. And I think that's what we're seeing with Trump in Venezuela.
It's been a steady escalation, isn't it? It started out with murdering unknown people in rubber boats. Then it moved on to piracy, the seizing of an oil tanker full of Venezuelan heavy crude, the very kind of heavy crude that U.S. refineries used to salivate over. They kidnapped the crew also. And now Trump says land action is starting. What does all that mean to you?
Well, certainly what it means is we know what the real reason, of course, is for Trump's actions in the Caribbean. And it's not about fighting drugs, it's about stealing oil. And in particular, stealing Venezuela's oil. We know Venezuela has the largest oil reserves in the world. Trump has talked about the U.S. controlling those in the past. And that's what it seems this whole conflict, if you want to call it that, is about. As you mentioned, you know, I represent one of the fishermen, the family of a fisherman who was killed, Alejandro Carranza, who's Colombian. And it's very clear these people were killed not because they were dealing in drugs, but really as a form of terrorism by the United States against both Venezuela and its neighbor Colombia, which is refusing to cooperate with the invasion of Venezuela. But I think you're right that now the real war with Venezuela seems to be beginning, and I think it will end tragically for everyone involved. It's something that we haven't seen in this hemisphere really uh, in a big way since the early 20th century, right? Trump looks more like Teddy Roosevelt or McKinley than a modern day U.S. president.
Certainly not the actions of a peace president. But then he didn't get the Nobel Peace Prize after all. It went to one of his stooges, one of his hirelings, who they presumably intend to impose on the Venezuelan people in the presidential palace. But how's she going to get through the millions of militiamen in order to sit there?
Yes, I don't think she in the end will be that person they're going to put in power if indeed they were going to be able to do that. But I think that that she, Maria Corina Machado, was given the Nobel Prize shows how degraded our Western institutions are, right? That the Nobel Prize went to someone who openly calls for the invasion of her own country. And she was given it at a time when Trump was threatening the invasion of her own country. It seems like the Nobel Prize was, in fact, assisting and aiding and abetting this intervention in Venezuela. It's completely outrageous. Whether she returns to Venezuela now after being feted in Oslo, who knows? But certainly the goal is to put someone like her in power who, by her own admission, has said she would like to open up the $1.7 trillion of resources of Venezuela, open that up to exploitation by Western interests.
Now, you mentioned Colombia, and I know you're the lawyer to several important people in Colombia. Trump, like a mob boss, actually said this week, "You're next. Colombia's next."
Yes, he's now threatening regime change in Colombia against a president, by the way, that no one disputes was democratically elected. No, there's not one person who claims he wasn't democratically elected. And he's a very popular president. He's a president that has taken Colombia from the grips of the ultra right wing that Colombia has been in for decades. And he has created a more humane country, a country that has, I think reclaimed its dignity from years of U.S. domination. And now, as you say, the U.S. is threatening regime change there. It's just abhorrent. It's abhorrent.
Now, the propaganda machine is in full blast. I keep reading that President Maduro is asking to go to Belarus or Cuba or somewhere in exchange for being able to take friends and family with them. This is just all lies. It is war propaganda of the most base kind. Maduro is going to stand and fight, is he not?
He will indeed. He's a guy that will die with his boots on, and he will not bend a knee to U.S. imperialism. If you've seen, I'm sure, George, you've seen the videos of him walking through Caracas with throngs of people around him, no security in sight. He is not a man who fears his own people or fears his fate. He will stand tall. And I think Venezuela will stand tall. In the end, Venezuela will win, but who knows how many casualties it will take for that to happen.
Well, that's the perplexing thing for me, Dan. Just the other week, my wife and I watched 5 nights in a row movies and documentaries about the Vietnam War. How could anyone look at the original Vietnam War in the 60s and 70s, calibrate the hundreds of thousands of American casualties, physical and mental casualties, 58,000 dead? Of course, Donald Trump didn't go there. His bone spurs problem allowed him to dodge the draft, though allowed him to disco dance and play golf for the rest of his life. How can an America that went through Vietnam be so sanguine about wading into another one?
Well, it's a great question. It recalls to mind the words of historian Gore Vidal, who said the USA stands for United States of Amnesia. I live in a country that forgets not even what happened 50 years ago, but what happened yesterday. And when you have that situation where we don't learn from history, and again, we don't even remember it, then we are apt to repeat it. And yes, we seem to be walking right into another Vietnam type war, or a Korean War before that. We didn't learn from that either. And it's also a country, in addition to having a poor memory, suffers from hubris, overweening pride, which is what destroys many empires.
You know, you just reminded me of something I was looking at today. On this day, a young woman, forgive me, I forget her name, became the first black student at the University of Alabama, but only for 3 days. She had to be expelled on the 3rd day for her own safety, because the rest of the student body, with the lawful authorities standing by and allowing it, literally rioted, violently rioted about the presence of a black student in the University of Alabama. And this was in my lifetime, Dan. I guess nobody remembered that today either. But this hubris and amnesia, it's a deadly combination, isn't it?
Absolutely. And it has brought our country to where we are today. where we've elected basically a con man, and again, who's stumbling into another war. The U.S. is addicted to war, and even against the American people's desires and interests. Most Americans, they don't want this war in Venezuela. The polls show that, right? They don't want the war in Gaza either. But our government doesn't care what the American people want. Trump doesn't care even about his own base that voted for him to end these wars. In fact, he bragged that he has 8 wars going and he's about to start a ninth one. As you say, it's a deadly combination.
Deadly combination. And who knew that you still had so many soldiers in Syria? That 3 of them could be gunned down by a guy in the service of the government, of that tough guy that Donald Trump has recognized, dropped the bounty for, and handed substantial aid. What are the American people saying about that?
Well, sadly, I think very few Americans understand what has happened in Syria. They don't understand that their government spent billions of dollars to remove a secular socialist government and replace it with Al Qaeda, with the group who attacked us on 9/11. Giuliani, the head of this group, was on the streets of New York City during the anniversary of 9/11, walking peacefully. And now you get what you pay for. That same group is now attacking Americans in Syria. It's incredible. But again, the media doesn't explain any of this to the American people, so few even know it.
Yeah, but of course, they'll all know about the atrocity that took place in Sydney, Australia today. As I made the point in my monologue, if 12 people had been shot queuing for food in Gaza, that would have actually been a quiet day, and nobody would have read about it or seen it on their television. But I'm sure the whole of America is currently fixated on Bondi Beach if they weren't on Gaza Beach.
Yes, absolutely. And as you mentioned in your preface, very few will know that the hero of the beach was himself a Muslim.
That's right.
This will be manipulated to actually increase the genocide in Gaza, right? In the end, the Palestinians will pay for this, just like they've paid for everything else, seemingly even paid for what Germany did during World War II. And as you say, the murders in Palestine continue, not just in Gaza, but in the West Bank as well. And who hears about it? Who hears about the killings in South Lebanon that continue to happen at the hands of Israel? As you say, these are nameless victims.